The legend began long before any living alien was born, and for 900 long years the greatest minds of the galaxy fought the same silent war against something they could not touch, could not break, and could not bend. It was not a weapon, not a monster, not a disease. It was an equation. A string of symbols so strange and so powerful that entire empires believed it held the key to controlling gravity, time, energy, and maybe even stars themselves. The aliens called it the infinity problem, and they spoke of it with shaking voices, like it was alive, like it could hear them. Generations of mathematicians, physicists, and star scholars spent their full lives trying to solve it, only to fail again and again. Some lost their minds staring at the symbols too long. Some claimed the equation whispered to them in dreams. Some died from exhaustion, refusing to stop working. The infinity problem became more than a challenge. It became a curse, a shadow that followed every advanced species. The belief spread that whoever solved it would control the universe, and whoever failed it would be destroyed by it. The Galactic Council, the most powerful group of alien leaders, grew afraid of the equation. They locked it away inside a massive research station floating in a dark and forbidden region of space where no civilian ships were allowed. The station was guarded day and night by elite scientists and soldiers who treated the equation like a dangerous prisoner. Only a few were allowed to even look at it, and those who did walked away pale and shaking, whispering that the symbols felt wrong, like they weren't meant for alien eyes. The years turned to centuries, and the story turned into legend. Entire civilizations were born, lived, and collapsed while the equation sat untouched behind steel walls and energy locks. Some said the equation was older than the Council itself. Some said it came from another universe. Others believed it was a message left behind by an extinct godlike species. But all agreed on one thing: no one could solve it. No one ever would. Then everything changed on a silent, cold morning when the research station floated peacefully in the empty dark, its halls lit with dim blue lights and its scientists following their normal routines. Suddenly, alarms exploded across the station, red sirens flashing, metal doors locking, and warning screens lighting up with bright symbols. The station AI spoke in a sharp voice that echoed through every room. Unknown vessel detected. Trajectory confirmed. Approaching restricted zone. The scientists rushed to their stations, confused and frightened. No ship had come close to this forbidden area in hundreds of years. The closest trade routes were thousands of light years away. There was nothing here but darkness, silence, and the infinity problem. But the scanners did not lie. A ship was coming. Its engines burned bright against the void, moving with calm and direct purpose. Officers pulled up its identification logs, and when they saw the origin, they froze in disbelief. The ship was human. The room exploded with nervous laughter, not the happy kind, but the kind born from fear. Humans were considered simple builders, basic engineers, creators of small ships and simple machines. They were not known for advanced math or superior intelligence. The Council had always seen humans as harmless explorers, nothing more. "It must be a mistake," one alien said, trying to steady his voice. "Humans have no business here." But the ship kept coming, silent and steady, like it knew exactly where it was going. The Council was alerted instantly. Messages flew across light years. Military fleets were warned. Leaders demanded answers. How did a human ship find the forbidden zone? Who told them about the station? What did they want? Inside the station, panic began to rise. Some scientists argued that the ship should be destroyed before it got close. Others insisted they observe and make contact. The highest-ranking commander ordered communication. "Unknown vessel, turn back immediately. This zone is restricted by galactic law." The station went quiet, everyone leaning toward the speakers, waiting. For a long moment, there was no reply. Only static and silence. Then a calm human voice answered. "Permission requested to dock." The aliens stared at each other, shocked. No fear. No apology. Just a request. The commander tried again, his voice tense. "State your purpose." The reply was even calmer, almost gentle. "We are here for the infinity problem." The entire station froze. Some dropped tools. Others gasped. A few whispered curses under their breath. No one spoke that name out loud, not even the highest leaders. The equation was sacred. Forbidden. Deadly. Humans don't even understand it. One alien whispered in disbelief. They think numbers are toys. Nervous laughter spread through the room as they imagined humans staring at the legendary symbols and fainting in confusion. But the laughter did not last. Because the human voice came again, clearer this time, confident. We request access to the equation. The words hit the room like a shockwave. Fear crept through the station. Every alien felt it crawling in their bones. How did humans even know the equation existed? How did they find this place? What were they planning? The commander tried to respond, but his throat was tight. His voice shook as he finally spoke. Access is impossible. The equation is restricted. Turn back now. But the human ship did not turn. It continued its slow approach, its engines humming softly, like a heartbeat in the dark. Screens flickered as the scanners zoomed in on the vessel. It wasn't large. It wasn't armed. It looked like a simple research ship, old and unthreatening. And that made everything worse. Because no sane species would come here, to the most feared place in the galaxy, with such a small and fragile ship, unless they were absolutely sure of something. The scientists whispered among themselves. Are they bluffing? Is it a trick? Do humans have a weapon? But deep down, a different fear began to grow. What if the humans knew something the aliens didn't? What if humans weren't as simple as everyone believed? The silence deepened as the ship drifted closer, its lights reflecting against the metal walls of the station. The aliens watched the monitors with wide eyes, breaths held, hearts racing. This station had seen genius after genius fall to the infinity problem. Entire lifetimes spent, entire species humbled. And now a human ship was requesting access, calmly, boldly, like it belonged here. The commander finally gave a trembling order. Prepare docking bay. Shock rippled through the station. Some officers protested, their voices loud and desperate. We cannot let them near it. Humans will go mad. It is suicide. But the order stood. The human ship slowed to a gentle stop as magnetic locks pulled it into docking position. The metal doors opened with a long, echoing hiss. A cold wind rushed into the bay. Dozens of alien guards stood ready, weapons raised, armor shining, hearts shaking. Everyone expected a team of human scientists, old, serious, brilliant scholars ready to face the greatest equation in the universe. But when the ramp lowered, only one person walked out. A single human. Young, calm, quiet, wearing simple clothing, carrying only a small tablet under his arm. No team, no weapons, no machines. Just one man. The aliens blinked in confusion. This wasn't a genius. This wasn't a leader. This wasn't a great human thinker. He looked like a basic technician, someone who fixed wires and cleaned data ports. The guards whispered to each other. This is a joke. Humans are fools. He will last 5 minutes. But when the human lifted his head and looked at the station around him, he did not look scared. He did not look confused. He simply breathed in, slow and steady, as if he already knew where he was and why he was here. His eyes were calm. Too calm. The commander stepped forward, voice sharp. State your identity. The human answered softly. I am the analyst. The aliens frowned. Not a name. A role. A strange one. The commander narrowed his eyes. And why are you here? The human held the tablet closer to his chest. To solve the equation. The room went silent again. Not a whisper. Not a breath. The infinity problem had broken the greatest minds in history. And this simple human claimed he was here to solve it, like it was just another task on a normal day. For the first time in hundreds of years, the aliens felt something new, something cold and heavy. Not anger. Not confusion. But fear. Because while every other species trembled before the infinity problem, this human had walked into the forbidden zone alone, and smiled. And somewhere deep in the station, behind steel walls and locked doors. The ancient symbols of the equation flickered as if they sensed something had finally changed. The galaxy had no idea, but this was the moment everything began. The moment a human stepped into the one place no one dared to enter. The moment the universe held its breath. The moment the infinity problem finally met someone who did not fear it. And the station felt smaller. The air felt tighter. The silence felt sharper. Because for the first time in 900 years, the equation had a challenger who wasn't trembling. A challenger who wasn't broken. A challenger who had come not to try, but to finish. And in that quiet, endless moment, every alien knew, nothing would ever be the same again. The moment the humans stepped deeper into the station, every alien eye followed him, not with curiosity now, but with a growing, painful fear that sat heavy in their chests like a weight they couldn't explain. And as he walked through the cold steel halls, his calm footsteps echoed softly, almost too softly, like he belonged there. Like the forbidden place wasn't forbidden for him at all. And that made the guards uneasy, their hands shaking slightly on their weapons even though he wasn't dangerous, wasn't armed, wasn't even wearing protective gear. Yet something about his quiet breathing and steady gaze felt more powerful than any army. And the commander kept replaying one sentence in his mind, to solve the equation. Because no one, not even the bravest alien genius, had ever said those words without shaking. And now this simple human said them like he was talking about fixing a broken wire. And it made the commander's throat tighten with dread as he led the human toward the sealed chamber where the infinity problem was kept. The long corridor filled with glowing red warning symbols, each one a reminder that the equation had broken minds, shattered spirits, and taken lives. But the human walked past them without a single flinch, while behind glass walls, scientists watched him, whispering, arguing, some terrified, some angry, some desperate to know how a species so underestimated could dare to stand before the universe's greatest mystery. And as the human walked, he silently studied everything, door panels, light patterns, security locks, not with fear, but with understanding, as if he was already calculating something in his mind, something far bigger than the equations on the screen. And that strange calm made one young alien scientist feel a sudden ache in her chest, a feeling she couldn't name, a mix of confusion and respect, because she had spent her entire life being told humans were slow thinkers, weak minds, simple builders, and yet this one moved like someone who saw more than others, someone who understood silence the way mathematicians understood numbers. And when they reached the final chamber door, the massive steel vault that held the infinity problem, the commander paused, his voice barely holding steady as he said, "Once this door opens, there is no turning back," hoping, silently begging, that the human would hesitate, would show fear, would decide to leave, because deep inside every alien heart lived the same cold truth. No one survived facing the equation alone. But the human did not step back, did not tremble, he only breathed in slowly, like he was preparing for something familiar, something he had already accepted long before he arrived. And he answered in a soft voice that somehow echoed through the hall, "I did not come to turn back." And something about those words hurt the aliens, because they weren't filled with pride or arrogance, they were filled with quiet certainty, like the human wasn't chasing glory, wasn't here to prove anything, but was simply following a path he couldn't ignore, as if the infinity problem wasn't a mystery to him, but a calling. And when the doors finally opened with a deep rumbling roar, the lights flickered, the air froze, and the great chamber revealed itself. An enormous room with a single floating screen at its center, glowing with ancient symbols that twisted and moved. Like living fire, the equation pulsing with an energy that made the aliens step back, their bodies reacting instinctively to the silent terror of the infinity problem. But the human stepped forward, eyes softening, his chest rising with a slow, emotional breath, because for the first time, the aliens saw something in his face. Grief, a quiet sadness, like he had carried this burden long before he walked into this room, like he had known struggle, pressure, loneliness, like numbers weren't just logic to him, but memories. And that emotion hit the young alien scientist so hard she felt tears gather in her eyes without warning. Because she realized that this human wasn't fearless. He was hurting, carrying something no one else could see, and the infinity problem wasn't scaring him because he had already faced something worse in his life, something that broke him and rebuilt him in silence. And when he reached the floating screen, the symbols twisted violently as if reacting, as if recognizing him, and alarms began flashing. systems detecting mental strain levels that should have crushed him instantly. But instead of collapsing, the human lifted his hand and gently touched the edge of the screen. Whispering in a voice full of pain and strange comfort, "I've seen patterns like this before," and those quiet words shattered the room, because the aliens had spent centuries believing the equation belonged to a power far beyond mortal understanding. Yet this human spoke of it like a memory, something that once lived in his world, something humans had brushed against without knowing, and suddenly every alien felt a deep, emotional shift. Like the universe had tilted, like everything they believed about humans, about intelligence, about fear, had been wrong, and the young scientist pressed her hand to the glass, whispering, "He isn't here to try, he's here because he already understands." And in that chilling moment, as the infinity problem pulsed brighter, the human closed his eyes, letting the weight of 900 years of alien suffering settle into his heart, and he stood there alone, a single fragile being in front of a force that had destroyed countless minds. Yet he did not break, did not scream, did not run. He simply breathed through the pain, through the memories, through whatever silent storm lived inside him, and that quiet strength filled the room with something no one had ever felt in the presence of the equation. Hope mixed with terror, because for the first time, the aliens realized the infinity problem might not be waiting for a genius, or a king, or a god, but for a human who could carry both logic and emotion. Someone who understood numbers not just with the mind, but with the heart. And as the chamber lights dimmed and the symbols began reacting faster, the human opened his eyes, tears glimmering but his voice steady as he whispered, "Let's begin." And the universe felt like it exhaled, knowing that whatever happened next, nothing would be the same, because the infinity problem had finally met someone who wasn't afraid to feel. The moment the human whispered, "Let's begin," the entire chamber seemed to shiver, as if the walls themselves understood the weight of those words, and the glowing symbols of the infinity problem twisted violently in response, surging with light so bright that several aliens outside the glass stumbled backward in fear, their hearts pounding as the air grew heavy, thick, almost alive, and in that suffocating silence the human did not move away, did not shield his eyes. He simply stared into the storm of shifting equations like someone staring into memories instead of mysteries, and as the room trembled softly beneath his feet, a low hum began spreading through the station, a sound that felt like a heartbeat, slow, steady, impossibly ancient, and alarms flickered but did not scream, as though even the machines were confused, unable to decide if what was happening was danger or destiny. And the human lifted his tablet, his fingers shaking, not with fear, but with something deeper, a quiet ache that made his breath unsteady, like he was standing on the edge of something painful he had known all his life but never spoken aloud. And the young alien scientist watching from behind the glass felt her chest tighten as she whispered, barely audible, "His alone, his truly alone." Because she could see it now in the way his shoulders moved, in the silent tension in his eyes, a loneliness that felt older than the station, older than the guards, older than the legend itself, as if he had spent years carrying questions no one else could answer, and now, staring at the infinity problem, he wasn't just solving numbers, he was facing every silent night, every unanswered thought, every moment he felt unseen, unheard, underestimated, and the symbols shifted again, faster, sharper, forming new patterns that should have shattered the mind of any living scientist. But instead the human stepped closer, whispering under his breath, "Patterns repeat, pain repeats, everything repeats." And those soft words were not logical. They were emotional, as if he understood the equation not with intelligence, but with wounds, and the chamber floor vibrated as the symbols wrapped around each other, creating shapes no alien language had ever named. And the scientists watching began to panic, shouting into comms, demanding the human be pulled out before his mind broke. But the commander could not speak, frozen by the sight of a human touching something no one dared to touch. And inside the chamber, the human's hand reached out, hovering just inches from the glowing equation, his fingers trembling as memories flickered through his mind. Nights of working alone, voices telling him he wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, that humans were not meant for greatness, that his dreams were useless, that numbers were pointless. And all those voices echoed inside him now, mixing with the pulse of the infinity problem. And for a moment his knees bent, his breath hitched, his eyes burned with tears, but he did not fall, he steadied himself, whispering through clenched teeth, "They were wrong." And the moment he said it, the symbols exploded outward in a spiral of light, forming a massive ring around him, like the equation itself was circling him, testing him, measuring him, and every alien watching felt their hearts crack with a strange emotion. Fear mixed with guilt, because for centuries they had mocked humans, dismissed them, treated them like small minds from a small world, and now they watched one human stand where their great geniuses had collapsed, and he stood not by force, not by power, but by sheer will, sheer pain, sheer quiet strength, and the young scientist pressed her forehead to the glass, tears sliding down her face as she whispered, "He's fighting something we can't see." Because she realized the infinity problem wasn't just numbers, it was pressure, it was weight, a crushing force meant to break the spirit, and the human was holding it with nothing but emotion, with nothing but a heart that refused to surrender, and inside the glowing ring, the human whispered, "You're not infinite, you're repeating." And the ring of symbols flickered violently as if shocked, and the station lights dimmed to near darkness, leaving only the human and the equation glowing in the void, like two souls facing each other. And the hum grew louder, the air tighter, and the commander finally found his voice, yelling to shut down the chamber, to pull the human out, to save him, but the systems wouldn't respond, as if the station itself had been locked out, overridden by something older, greater, and in that trapped silence the human took a shaky breath and began writing on his tablet, his fingers moving faster and faster, tears slipping down his face but his eyes sharp, focused, determined, because this wasn't just solving a problem, this was proving something, to every alien who doubted him, to every voice that mocked him, to every shadow that told him he was small, and to himself. Because for the first time in his life he wasn't running from the impossible. He was embracing it. And as the first line of his solution formed, the symbols on the ring shifted in perfect synchronization, like the equation was responding, acknowledging him, listening to him, and the young scientist gasped as she realized with a trembling voice, "It's changing because of him." And the human whispered through a cracked voice filled with pain and hope, "I'm not afraid," and the moment he said it, the ring collapsed inward into a single blinding point of light that shot straight into his tablet. Merging with his work, and every screen on the station flashed the same terrifying message, "Progress, 64%. Gasps, cries, disbelief spread through the halls, because no alien mind in 900 years had ever reached even 1%, and this human, this quiet, lonely human, had reached 64% in minutes, and as the light faded and the chamber fell silent, the human stood trembling, exhausted, tears drying on his cheeks, but still standing, still breathing, still refusing to break. And every alien who saw him felt the same thing in their bones. The universe had just shifted, and the infinity problem was no longer a legend of fear, it was a mirror, reflecting something they never believed possible. A human who could feel deeply enough to do the impossible. The moment the screens flashed progress, 64%, the station seemed to stop breathing, as if every wall, every light, every circuit had frozen in disbelief, and for several long heartbeats no one spoke, no one moved. The entire galaxy's greatest prison of knowledge held in a silence so deep it felt like the universe itself was listening, and inside that silence the human stood alone, chest rising and falling in shaky breaths, his fingers still trembling around the tablet, sweat clinging to his skin, his eyes dazed but determined, and even though he looked exhausted, even though he looked fragile enough to fall, there was something unbroken in him, something burning quietly behind his tears, a fire the aliens couldn't name, and that frightened them more than the equation ever had. Because for 900 years the infinity problem had crushed every mind that dared touch it, yet this one human had faced it and remained standing, and as whispers spread through the observation decks, fear began to ripple outward, growing faster than light, faster than logic, reaching leaders and scientists across the galaxy through emergency channels. Their voices shaking as they demanded updates, demanded explanations, demanded someone stop the human before the universe changed forever. Because deep inside them all was the same icy truth: if a human solved the equation, their power, their control, their history, everything they believed about intelligence and dominance would shatter, and panic filled their voices as fleets were ordered to launch, warships powering up engines, armies preparing for conflict, because entire empires had built their pride on the belief that humans were small, simple, harmless. But now that belief cracked like thin glass, and fear replaced arrogance, fear so sharp it hurt to breathe, and back inside the station, The commander's voice shook as he tried to force strength into words that no longer felt real, shouting, "Shut down the chamber." But the systems refused, every control panel flashing denial signals, as if something older than technology had locked the room. And the young alien scientist stared through the glass with trembling hands pressed tight, tears streaking her face, her voice breaking as she whispered, "He's still going, he's still fighting." Because the human, despite his shaking limbs, lifted his gaze back to the swirling remnants of the equation. His lips parted as if he were whispering something only he could hear, something deep inside his memory, something bruised and sacred. And when he took a single unsteady step forward, the lights flickered again, the screen pulsed, and new symbols appeared, symbols no alien had ever seen before, twisting like constellations caught in a storm, and the pressure in the room intensified, a heavy, invisible weight that pushed every alien back, forcing them away from the glass. But the human leaned into it, shoulders tense, eyes glimmering, and in that moment he didn't look brave, he didn't look powerful. He looked wounded, like someone who had carried failure and doubt for years, someone who had been told he wasn't enough, that humans weren't enough, and all of that pain poured into his voice when he whispered, barely audible, "I can't stop. I won't stop." And the young scientist felt her heart twist painfully, because she finally understood that this wasn't about glory or fame. This was personal, deeply personal. Like every number on that screen was tied to a memory of being dismissed, every symbol tied to a moment of being underestimated. And as the human raised his trembling hands and continued writing, the infinity problem reacted violently, sending waves of shifting light through the chamber, and every monitor across the station blazed red with a new message, external alert. Multiple fleets incoming, and the commander's eyes widened in horror as warship signatures appeared on the radar, dozens of them. Then hundreds, alien empires racing toward the station like terrified predators, desperate to stop what they once claimed was impossible. And panic erupted among the staff, voices cracking as they argued whether to evacuate, whether to fight, whether to surrender. But no matter how loud their fear grew, one truth echoed louder: the human was still working, still breathing, still refusing to break, even as the pressure tightened around his skull and pain flashed across his face, his knees buckling slightly, his hand gripping the edge of the console to stay upright. And for a moment it looked like he might fall, like the weight of the infinity problem would finally crush him. But then he forced himself upright again, wiping a tear with the back of his hand, whispering in a voice filled with painful honesty, "I've failed before. I won't fail now." And those words struck the young scientist like a blade, because she heard the truth in them, the quiet suffering of someone who had spent years feeling small, someone who had been laughed at, ignored, dismissed, and yet still stood here, still trying, still believing in something no one else believed in. And she pressed her hand to the glass, whispering shakily, "Please, don't break," as if her voice could reach him through the walls. And inside the chamber the equation flared again, symbols spinning into a spiral of impossible geometry, reacting to the human's latest input. And the progress bar surged upward, 72%, 78%, 81%, and gasps filled the station like a rising tide, because the impossible was becoming real, and every alien who saw it felt a deep, helpless ache in their chest, a mix of terror and awe, because they were witnessing history, witnessing the universe tilt toward a new truth. And as the alarm sirens screamed warnings of incoming war fleets drawing closer by the second, the human lifted his head, eyes tired but burning with quiet fire, and whispered the words that made every heart in the station stop. "I'm not doing this for power. I'm doing this because no one believed I could." And with that confession hanging heavy in the air, the station shook under the thunder of approaching armies, and the infinity problem pulsed brighter than ever, as if sensing that the final answer was no longer distant, because the human was still standing, still fighting, still refusing to surrender, and the galaxy, for the first time in its long, cold history, felt terrified of a single human heart. The station trembled under the weight of the oncoming fleets, vibrations humming through the metal floor like distant thunder. But inside the sealed chamber the human didn't turn, didn't look at the alarms, didn't flinch at the red lights flashing warnings of war, because his entire world had narrowed to the swirling storm of symbols before him. And as the progress numbers climbed past anything the galaxy had ever witnessed, his breath grew uneven, his vision blurred, and yet his fingers kept moving, tracing lines of logic and emotion. Across the tablet, each stroke a quiet rebellion against every voice that ever told him he was small, and the infinity problem reacted, twisting into sharper, faster shapes that flickered like lightning across the screen, and the pressure inside the chamber pushed harder against his body, squeezing his lungs, fogging his mind, making every second feel like drowning. But he refused to step back, whispering through clenched teeth, "I'm almost there." Even though pain shot through his head like breaking glass, and outside the chamber the young alien scientist pressed both hands against the glass, tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched him stumble, watched his knees buckle, watched him choke on a breath that sounded more like a sob, and her heart shattered with a fear she didn't understand, a fear not for the galaxy, not for the fleets, but for him. This fragile human who stood alone against the impossible, and she whispered, voice cracking, "Someone help him, he's hurting." But no one could open the chamber, no one could reach him, no one could stop what had begun, because the systems were locked, responding only to the equation's progress, as if the infinity problem itself had taken control, refusing to let its first true challenger escape, and the commander's face twisted with helpless fear as he watched the incoming war fleets fill the radar. Entire empires rushing forward like terrified animals trying to stop a wildfire, their desperation spreading through the station in frantic voices screaming into comms, but inside the chamber none of that noise reached the human, because all he could hear was the pounding of his own heartbeat, loud and uneven, echoing through his skull like a drum of war, and with every pulse he remembered faces, words, memories. Teachers shaking their heads, colleagues laughing, families doubting, people telling him humans weren't made for great things, weren't meant for ultimate discovery, that equations like this belonged to higher beings, and those memories hurt, stabbing deep into his chest. But they also fueled him, gave him a fire so raw and emotional that his tears fell freely now, dripping onto the tablet as he whispered, voice breaking, "You never saw me, none of you ever saw me." And the symbols pulsed brighter in response, as if the infinity problem was listening, as if it understood that this wasn't just logic, it was pain. And the young scientist choked on a breath as she whispered, "He's not solving it with knowledge, he's solving it with everything he is." And the chamber lights flickered violently as the progress bar surged again. 87%. 92%. 95%, and gasps spread through every corridor, through every viewing deck, through every comm channel across the galaxy where leaders watched in horror, because they realized something none of them had ever imagined. This human wasn't brilliant in the way they measured brilliance. He wasn't a calculating machine. He wasn't a cold tactician. He was something else entirely, someone who felt deeply enough to see patterns where others saw chaos, someone who carried hurt like fuel, someone who turned scars into equations, and that terrified them more than any weapon, because emotion was unpredictable, unstoppable, and as the fleets drew closer, weapons primed, ready to destroy the station if the equation completed, the commander whispered in despair, "If he finishes it, everything changes." But inside the chamber the human could no longer hear anything except the faint echo of a memory. Someone once telling him he would never matter, that his life would never amount to anything, and that memory ripped through him like a blade, forcing him to gasp, forcing his body to sag, forcing his hand to tremble so violently he nearly dropped the tablet. And for one fragile second it looked like he might collapse, like the infinity problem would finally crush the fragile human heart that dared to defy it. But then something inside him steadied, something quiet and soft, a voice not of anger, but of truth, whispering from deep inside his soul, "I matter to me." And the moment that thought rose within him, his spine straightened, his breath steadied, his hand lifted again, and with a trembling fingertip he traced the final pattern he saw forming in the chaos. Something elegant, something simple, something heartbreakingly beautiful. And the symbols reacted in a blinding burst, collapsing into a single line of glowing numbers that matched perfectly with his trembling handwriting, and every screen in the station jumped. 99%. And the entire galaxy seemed to stop, fleets halting in space. Soldiers frozen, leaders speechless, as if all of existence was holding its breath, and inside the chamber the human swayed on his feet, tears falling freely, his voice a shattered whisper. This wasn't impossible, it was just lonely. And those words hit the young scientist like a tidal wave, her knees giving out as she sank to the floor, sobbing, because she finally understood the cruel truth. No one had ever solved the infinity problem because no one had ever faced it with a heart that knew loneliness so deeply, so painfully, that it could recognize the pattern hidden within it. And as the blinding glow surged upward again, filling the chamber with white fire. The final percentage flickered once, twice, and then the station shook with a silent, earth-shattering flash as the screen displayed one word that ripped through every soul watching: complete. And in that breathless instant, as the infinity problem surrendered for the first time in history, the human collapsed to his knees, not broken, not defeated, but overwhelmed, his face wet with tears, his voice barely a breath as he whispered, "They were wrong about us," and for the first time in 900 years, the universe felt small, not because it shrank, but because a single human had reached beyond it. When the word complete blazed across every screen, a shaking silence swallowed the station. A silence so deep and crushing that it felt like the air itself had forgotten how to move, and in the center of that silence the human remained on his knees, shoulders trembling, breath broken, his fingers still curled around the tablet. Like it was the only thing keeping him connected to reality, and tears slipped down his face. Not loud tears, not dramatic ones, but quiet, tired tears, the kind that come from a lifetime of carrying weight alone. And as he struggled to lift his head, the glowing symbols of the infinity problem did not fade the way the aliens expected. They did not vanish like a solved puzzle. Instead they began to melt, flowing downward like liquid light, pooling on the floor around him in a soft humming glow. And the young alien scientist, still collapsed against the glass, wiped her shaking eyes as she whispered, voice raw, "It's not over. Solving it didn't end anything." And she was right, because the chamber suddenly pulsed with a deep, resonant thud, like the heartbeat of something enormous and ancient waking up for the first time in centuries, and the station trembled again. But this time the tremor felt different, not violent, not hostile, but heavy with purpose, heavy with meaning, and the lights dimmed until the only illumination came from the swirling pool of light surrounding the human, casting him in a soft glow that made him look impossibly small and impossibly significant at the same time. And as he tried to stand, his legs buckled, his body weak from the emotional war he had just fought, and he caught himself with shaking arms, whispering through a cracked voice, "What did I unlock?" Because even he didn't know, even he didn't understand what solving the infinity problem truly meant. And outside the chamber, chaos erupted across the galaxy, fleets communicating in frantic bursts, leaders screaming orders, some demanding the station be destroyed immediately, others begging for answers, for explanations, for reassurance that the universe wasn't about to change in ways they couldn't control. And fear choked every voice, every breath, because for the first time in history, every powerful empire felt powerless before a single human mind, and the commander stared at the displays with horrified disbelief as a new message began pulsing across the screens, a message written in a language no alien recognized. But the young scientist gasped the moment she saw it, because she recognized the structure, the shape, the pattern. It wasn't alien text, it wasn't mathematical notation, it was something else, something heartbreakingly familiar, and she whispered, voice trembling like a child's, "It's a map." And those words struck the room like lightning, because the infinity problem wasn't a weapon, wasn't a tool, wasn't a formula for destruction. It was a doorway, a set of coordinates, a guide to somewhere beyond known space, somewhere no species had ever reached, somewhere every empire feared to even imagine. And as the symbols expanded outward, forming a three-dimensional projection above the human, showing stars, galaxies, and a single pulsing point beyond all of them, a place marked only as origin, the human's breath caught in his throat, his heart squeezing painfully in his chest because something inside him recognized it, not in logic but in emotion, in instinct, in some ancient, buried knowing that made his knees tremble even harder, and he whispered, voice hollow with awe and dread, "Humans, we've seen this pattern before." And the young scientist's hand flew to her mouth as tears welled anew, because she could feel the truth in his voice, a truth heavier than fear, heavier than history. And outside the chamber the alarms blared again. But this time the warning was different. Hyperspace distortion detected, and every alien turned toward the viewing windows as space outside the station rippled like water. Stars warping, bending, twisting, as though something enormous was pressing against the fabric of the universe from the other side. And ships across the sector panicked, fleets breaking formation, weapons powering down not by command but by force, as if their systems were being overridden by an energy they couldn't fight. And inside the chamber the pool of light rose upward, forming a column around the human, wrapping him in a soft, pulsing glow that made his breath hitch in his chest. But instead of fear, his expression shifted into something deeper, something raw, a painful, fragile understanding, and he whispered, voice trembling, "It wasn't a problem, it was a message." And the young scientist sobbed openly now, because she understood the brutality of that truth. Understood that for 900 years the galaxy had tried to solve something that was never meant to be solved by them, something that wasn't speaking to them, something that had been waiting across centuries for a mind shaped not by arrogance, not by power, but by struggle, by doubt, by loneliness, by the quiet resilience unique to humans. And the chamber shook again, not violently, but like a final breath, a sigh of release. And the light around the human brightened until it swallowed the entire room, turning everything into white radiance, so pure it hurt to look at. And as his silhouette blurred into the glow, he whispered one last trembling truth. Maybe it was always meant for us. And then the light surged upward, and every camera, every sensor, every viewing panel went white. And in that blinding instant the young scientist screamed his name. Not because she knew him, not because she had spoken to him, but because her heart couldn't bear the thought of losing someone who had stood alone for so long. And when the light finally vanished, when the chamber dimmed back into shadow, the floor was still, the screens were silent, and the human was gone for a long, suffocating moment. After the light vanished, the chamber remained still, too still. Like the universe itself was holding its breath. And outside the glass the young alien scientist stared into the empty room with wide, trembling eyes, her chest rising and falling in sharp, broken breaths as her mind struggled to accept what her heart already knew. That the human who had stood there moments ago, fragile and hurting and unbelievably brave, was no longer in this world, no longer in this space, no longer anywhere she could reach, and her voice cracked into a shattered whisper, "He's gone." As if saying it aloud might make it real, but the words only made her knees buckle again, her body folding to the cold floor as grief washed through her in a way she didn't understand. Grief that didn't make sense because she had never spoken to him, never known his name, never heard his story, yet she felt as if she had lost someone deeply familiar, someone who had carried every silent pain she had ever felt, someone who had stood for every lonely heart in the universe. And that raw ache spread through the station like a silent contagion, guards lowering their weapons, scientists staring blankly at the empty chamber, the commander's voice dying in his throat as the truth settled into every trembling mind. He hadn't sacrificed a weapon, or a strategy, or a machine. He had sacrificed himself, a single human, unarmed and unseen, had given everything to unlock something none of them understood. And as shock rippled through the galaxy, the war fleets that had been racing toward the station finally dropped out of hyperspace. Thousands of massive ships surrounding the forbidden zone in a prison of fear. But instead of opening fire, instead of demanding surrender, instead of screaming orders, they fell silent as well, their sensors picking up the same impossible reading. A lingering energy signature in the center of the chamber, not fading, not dispersing, but pulsing like a heartbeat, steady and alive. And when the screens flickered back on, every display across the station showed a single glowing mark, a symbol from the map the Infinity Problem had revealed, the symbol marking origin, and beneath it, a message began to form, not in alien script, not in mathematical code, but in human language, simple, clear, aching with emotion. "I'm still here." Gasps broke across the control decks, voices rising in disbelief, and the young scientist's hand flew to her mouth as tears poured down her cheeks because she recognized the tone. Quiet, gentle, lonely, the same way he had spoken before stepping into the light, and her voice trembled as she whispered, "He didn't die, he crossed." And that realization struck every watching soul like thunder, because crossing meant leaving the known universe, leaving time, leaving reality, stepping into a place no species had ever reached, a place beyond science, beyond power, beyond fear. And suddenly the fleets outside no longer looked like armies. They looked like frightened children staring into a darkness too vast to understand, and voices from their bridges echoed through comms, leaders who had once mocked humanity now shaking as they asked the same question, where did the human go? But there was no answer, only the steady pulse of energy in the chamber, rising, growing, expanding until the walls themselves began to hum in resonance, and as the vibration deepened, a holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the room, a ghostly echo of the map, the stars unfolding once more, the path to origin glowing brighter than ever. And then something new appeared, coordinates updating, shifting, aligning, as if whatever force waited beyond space was responding to the humans' arrival. And the young scientist's breath hitched painfully as she realized the map wasn't static anymore. It was evolving, changing, reacting, and she whispered through tears. He unlocked the destination, but he also became the key. And outside the station, the war fleets backed away instinctively, engines dimming, weapons powering down, because for the first time in their long history, they were witnessing something not meant for conquest, not meant for domination, but something sacred, something that felt like watching dawn break after centuries of night. And the commander, his voice rough with awe and shame, whispered, "We feared him, because we never understood him." And that truth hit everyone like a blade, because they had spent centuries calling humans weak, small, simple, unimportant, and yet it was a human who had walked into the heart of the impossible, not for power, not for glory, but because no one believed he could, and that quiet, aching motive, so human, so raw, had opened a door billions of alien minds could not even approach. And as the energy pulse grew brighter, filling the chamber with a soft golden glow, something else happened, something that broke every heart watching. The holographic map shifted one more time, forming a single line of words beneath the coordinates, words written in his voice, his mind, his memory. "Don't be afraid of the unknown." The young scientist pressed her forehead to the glass, sobbing openly now, whispering, "You weren't just solving an equation, you were teaching us how to feel." And the fleets outside slowly dispersed, drifting away like ghosts in the dark, because they understood now that there was nothing left to fight, nothing left to stop, nothing left to fear except their own smallness. And as the chamber's glow softened into silence once more, the station finally exhaled a breath it had been holding for 900 years, and the galaxy, for the first time in its ancient life, bowed, not to power, not to empire, but to a single human heart that had dared to believe in itself when no one else did. In the hours that followed, a heavy stillness settled over the station. Not the cold silence of fear, but the fragile quiet that comes after something world-shifting, something soul-shaking, something so immense that hearts could not yet catch up to reality. And as lights flickered softly through the corridors, the young alien scientist remained pressed against the glass of the empty chamber, her hands trembling, her eyes swollen from crying, her mind replaying every moment of the human's final stand, every breath, every tear, every whisper. Because even though the room was empty, she could still feel him there, like a lingering warmth in a place that had always been ice, and she whispered into the quiet, "You changed everything. And you never even asked for anything," her voice breaking. Because she knew now that his journey had never been about pride or proving superiority. It had been about something deeper, something painfully human. The need to matter, the need to be seen, the need to rise above the weight of doubt that had pushed him down his entire life. And outside the station, as fleets drifted away in stunned retreat, entire civilizations fell into shocked silence, their leaders staring at screens that displayed the new, living map shining in the chamber, a map that now pulsed with a steady rhythm like a heartbeat, each pulse sending coordinates deeper into regions no chart had ever named, and whispers spread across star systems, soft and trembling. A human went where the universe ends. Words that felt unreal, words that tasted like myth, words that made empires tremble, not with anger, but with awe, because they finally understood that strength wasn't noise, wasn't weapons, wasn't conquest. It was resilience. It was quiet endurance. It was the courage to walk alone into the unknown when everyone said you would fail. Inside the station, the young scientist finally rose on shaking legs, wiping her face as she stepped toward the control console, needing, aching, to understand what had become of him. And as her fingers hovered over the glowing interface, the map shifted again, responding to her presence with a soft ripple of light. And then a sound filled the chamber, not a voice in air, but a whisper inside the mind, gentle and distant, like an echo carried across infinity, and she gasped as she felt it rather than heard it. A familiar warmth brushing against her thoughts, a quiet human presence whispering, "I'm not gone. I'm ahead," and her heart clenched so hard she nearly cried out, because the message wasn't cold, wasn't tragic. It was full of fragile hope, full of wonder, full of something she had never felt from any alien, any leader, any genius. A sense of discovery wrapped in tenderness, and tears spilled down her cheeks again as she whispered back, voice shaking, "Are you alone?" And for a moment there was no answer, just the soft glow of the map expanding outward, revealing galaxies like blooming Flowers, revealing a path stretching beyond existence. And then the presence returned, softer still, like a fading heartbeat. No. I'm not alone. There's something here. Something waiting. The chamber lights dimmed, the map shrinking into a single, glowing point marked origin, and the realization struck her like a tidal wave. The infinity problem had never been meant to conquer the universe. It had been meant to guide someone to a beginning, not an end, and she pressed her hand to the console, whispering with trembling faith. You didn't disappear, you arrived. And outside the station, starships paused mid-flight, entire worlds turning their attention toward the forbidden zone as the final transformation unfolded, because the map, once a flat projection, now unfolded into a shimmering doorway of light. A portal suspended in the chamber like a window into a distant horizon, and gasps echoed through control decks as readings confirmed the unthinkable. It led outside space-time, beyond the laws of reality itself, and the scientist's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer, her voice breaking with a mix of fear and awe. He opened a path, for us, and that truth spread across the galaxy like a tremor, shaking every belief, every hierarchy, every arrogant assumption. Because the universe was no longer a cage of limits. It was a frontier, and a human had become its first traveler. Then, as the portal shimmered with soft, golden light, a final message appeared on every screen, written in his handwriting, his gentle simplicity, his quiet truth. Don't follow because I succeeded. Follow because you're brave enough to try. And those words shattered every heart that read them, because they weren't instructions, they weren't orders, they were an invitation. An invitation to rise, to hope, to dream, and the young scientist fell to her knees once more, not in despair, but in reverence, whispering through her tears, we feared humans, but it was fear of ourselves. Because she finally understood the most painful, beautiful truth of all. He hadn't shown them human superiority. He had shown them human possibility. The endless potential that grows in silence, in doubt, in loneliness, in hearts that refuse to break outside. Stars continued to shimmer like distant witnesses, and slowly, one by one, the ships that had come to stop him turned away, engines igniting not with fear, but with wonder, heading back to worlds forever changed. While in the chamber the portal pulsed once more before fading into a soft afterglow, leaving behind a universe that suddenly felt wider, deeper, more alive, and somewhere beyond. The edge of reality, beyond time, beyond fear, beyond every limit the galaxy had ever believed in. A single human stepped forward into the unknown. His voice carried across eternity in a whisper full of quiet triumph and aching emotion.